My name is Kerry Bystrom. I'm the Associate Dean of Bard College Berlin and a Professor of Literature and Human Rights. I have the privilege of moderating perhaps the most unusual panel on a quite innovative conference schedule. Let me just say a couple things at the beginning to set up the panel and to give you a bit of a sense of the structure. I'm sure most of us in this room will agree that education is a key site for creating the livable worlds that Peter Gatrell talked about in the keynote the first evening, or perhaps even better, since I know, speaking to some students, they wanted to fight the idea that livable was good enough, to create the shared worlds that Hannah Arendt, for instance, thought about when she talked about making a world like a table between us, right? A world in which across and around a table, people can share themselves in word and deed. Of course, this, I think, and I again think many of you would agree, can't be education as usual in the integration model that's come under so much pressure already this far in the conference. Asking other people coming from regions of war, of calamity, coming for reasons of structural violence, to simply think like Europeans, to use the term that Orwa spoke to us about yesterday, is certainly not the answer. It's not attentive to the needs of newcomers, and it also passes up an amazing opportunity for those of us who are from Europe or Euro-America, in my case, or have already learned to think like Europeans in that sense. One of the more inspiring outcomes of this so-called refugee crisis from 2015, at least in the German landscape that I've been situated in since before that time, was opening up space for thinking again what education means to society, what its role is in society, and in helping create a society that we can be happy with, right? That is more than livable for many different kinds of people. And there's also been a great impetus for innovative projects trying to rethink education in a more mutual or reciprocal manner. So speaking for Bard College Berlin, one thing we did in 2015, in fact, it was in development quite before the so-called refugee crisis at that point in time, was the creation of a program called the Program in International Education and Social Change, which brings students from at-risk regions around the world into the campus, not as a way of rescue, but also from an acknowledgement of how much they bring to our community and how much we need to learn from these people's experiences. So we had our first pilot class this past year. They've just finished their first year, and some of them are in front of you. 4 Syrian students and 1 Greek student. We are in the process of putting together our class for next year, which will, in the end, I think, be 15 students from Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere, and we have funding for at least 10 more students in the cohort in the following years. So this has been a massive institutional commitment on our part. We are thrilled to be able to host these students and bring them in touch with our already extraordinarily diverse student body who are coming from all around the world. We've also, recognized that bringing in students from different backgrounds means that we also need to experiment with educational models and how we do things in the classroom. And what we're going to be focusing on today is one concrete example of a class that Marion Detjen has carried out across the year, in fact, at Bard College Berlin. So what will happen, Marion's going to say a few words. She's going to introduce the students who are responsible for the exhibition that you saw outside as well. And then we're going to have 2 responses. Now, Marion has already been introduced quite often, so maybe for the sake of time, let me only say that in addition to all of her academic qualifications that you've heard about and you see in the construction of the conference, she's been a truly inspirational colleague and worker since I've known her over the past year and a half. And her work, at the Center for Contemporary History at Bard College Berlin and with Wir machen das has set a model for many of us who aspire to be activist scholars. once their group is finished, and we think this will take about 45 minutes, we'll have short responses by two eminent educationalists. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but we'll just go on. The first one is Jane O. Newman. Jane O. Newman is professor of comparative literature at the University of California, Irvine. She's the author of quite a number of books, most recently Benjamin's Library, Modernity, Nation, and the Baroque. She's currently working on a project at the American Academy about Erich Auerbach, who many of you will recall was himself a forced migrant in Turkey, and is completing this project.
Sure.
While she's at the American Academy this year, among with many other work that she does, particularly, for instance, with the Scholars at Risk program and the Olive Tree Initiative. Mena, Marc, Hanna. Let me find it. Is Dean of the Barenboim Said Academy, which has very recently opened. He received his PhD from Oxford University's Merton College, where he studied musicology and music composition. Prior to coming to the Barenboim Said Academy, Hanna was assistant artistic director and dramaturg at the Houston Grand Opera and visiting scholar and lecturer in musicology at Rice University's Shepherd School of Music. His research and teaching interests include Middle Eastern chant, music of the 20th and 21st centuries, and composition and electronic music. So we'll hear from people who are involved in very different ways and what it means to rethink education, its role in society, and response to migration in the 20th and 21st century. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you. Thank you, Kerry. This is a very exciting moment for us all, the students and me. And I think that this panel has a double purpose, actually. It wants to present the interim and tentative results of one project that has been trying out new and inclusive practices of teaching and of students' work during the last year. But also it wants, on more general terms, to discuss the chances and challenges of migration for higher education in humanities and social sciences. And hopefully you were all able to have a look at this pop-up exhibition in the corridor and in the adjacent room. It's a collaborative work of this migration class at Bard College Berlin and of an architecture master class of Michelle Howard. I don't know whether she's here. Hi, Michelle. From the Academy of Fine Arts, Vienna, and I can't actually believe that this exhibition is standing. And there's a long list of names who I should thank for, which would, like, naming them all, take up my 10 minutes. So I just thank Michelle and the artists of the German-Syrian network Flux, Foreign Local Artistic Exchange, who helped the students with transforming their academic projects into kind of artistic outcomes. And thank Bard College Berlin and also the Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung, who helped financing the materials and all the travel costs that were involved. But most, and especially I want to thank the students. This exhibition has been really a collaborative effort of all of them, helping each other and taking considerable risks, I think, in the transformation of their projects. And it has been an amazing group, and the courage and care and faith that you have shown to each other and to me, developing your projects and traveling this journey together has been quite a miracle, I think, and a very, very important experience for me. So first, I'd like to say something about the emergence of this exhibition and how it is connected to this conference. And then I'll hand over to the students who will give you very short impressions of their individual work process in a speed presentation. And then we'll enter into a dialogue with Jane and Mena about the correlation between migration, education, and creativity, and listening to their experiences of higher education in migrant or post-migrant settings. and then open up the discussion to the public. So when more than 1 year ago, the idea of having a conference on contemporary migration history first developed in the Center for Contemporary History, it was clear to me that I wouldn't want such a conference without the perspectives of the recently arrived forced migrants. That was in fall 2015. And we talked about it yesterday. It's not just about giving voice, but about reacting adequately to the reality and showing responsibility ourselves as researchers and teachers. When I actually imagined at that moment a conference on exile and refugeedom in the beginning of the 1940s in the United States without hosting Hannah Arendt, which is an impossible thought for me. So because, our present understandings of what the condition of refugeedom entails was formed to a great part by concepts and ideas developed from the experiences of refugees like Hannah Arendt in the past. And how can we now show responsibility for the development of concepts and ideas in the future from the experiences of refugees in this present? Obviously, it was hard to find a recently arrived academic migration researcher from a country like Syria or Afghanistan or Eritrea. First of all, Syria has been a dictatorship for decades, and that had consequences for academic humanities and social sciences there. So there are not just not that many migration researchers from Syria. And secondly, those few researchers that exist can often not leave their host country. We actually wanted to invite Heid to speak here, and he would have had time and would have liked to come, but he couldn't come because of paper issues and because of his Syrian passport. Or they are terribly busy and overbooked, like Ruba Maysen, who also wanted to come and in the end had to cancel her coming because of other obligations. In Germany, there are though wonderful artists from Syria and Afghanistan, though. So one important step for this conference was to open it up to artists and activists and to give the conference altogether a trans-academic approach. And still, I didn't want to delegate everything to the arts. So the question remained how to include the experience of the recently arrived in our time in a way that addresses our own responsibilities in academia. And the answer to this was for me to make a strong effort of inclusion in the field of higher education, in humanities and social sciences, to enable the young newly arrived to develop concepts as students and to give them scholarships and take them into my own bachelor class on post-war German migration history that I started at that time at Bard College Berlin. So with this ambition, then I faced consequences. It's just not enough to take newly arrived into a class. The class itself changes. And a lot of what we teach, our narratives and concepts and methodologies, independent of how critical we are ourselves towards this, have a specific background and have grown in certain national and disciplinary traditions. And that's sort of okay, so we work with it, but it requires a lot of discussion. Discussion not in a confrontational way, but in a sense of an exchange of experience. So what we mean when we use certain words and how we deal with them and how they refer to the experiences the students have. So the term refugee really was the first one that we had to tackle in class. We all don't like to use it, as we don't like to use other words. And it has many, many, many meanings that we first had to discuss. And language actually became an issue all through the class, not only for those who have to express themselves in a foreign language, like I myself, wishing to be, I could speak in German now with a translator, but I don't want intermediaries between the students and me, so I have to cope with my unperfect English, and you have to cope with it as well, and the students too. But it was also an issue for the native speakers. who have to accept the use of it to be a matter of constant negotiation and effort to be made. Also, the conventions and formats of academic research become an issue. So if you insist on only essay writing, as necessary as it is to teach, so much of what is known beyond or outside academic traditions will not find an expression or will just get lost. So it seemed natural to me eventually, after having established a historical basis in the first term, to enhance the projects with non-verbal language, with visual or sonic or performative modes of expression. And then also the role of the teacher changes. The students come up with thoughts and ideas that require to listen and to learn instead of to evaluate and to criticize them. And at one moment, actually, I was hit by a Socratic cognition, first of all, in the face of the political revolutionary and war and escape experiences by Wafa and Dakhil and Muhannad and Raisa, but then also in the face of their advance in knowledge just due to them being young and going into the future in these fast-moving times. And we had many conversations about how questions of identity and belonging as a migrant are being negotiated in social media, with these memes that Tamar will talk about that you hopefully have looked at outside, and the lifestyle blogs that Bruno and Clara imitate in the Integration Guru blog that you should all look up on the website, and about that somewhat cynical sense of humor that armors a generation that is being released by us into a rather uncertain and maybe also bleak future. And from all of this, the exhibition emerged that is now standing out there. First as a collection of what we call notations without artistic ambitions, and then in the process maybe as something like a Gesamtkunstwerk. So what is this exhibition in this conference, and what can we conclude from it? It's certainly not an end product, as Marga, where's Marga? Here's Marga, who has written about liberal arts as a migrant concept and given us her plant Frederick over there, a plant, as a metaphor, reminded me some days ago in an email from which I want to quote. As we move ahead and are thrown into the fray of the conference, we must keep in mind the telos of our efforts. And the telos of our efforts is not this conference and not the products out there, but it lies in the encouragement and development of the students themselves in their individualities. So I want this exhibition to be a promise that in migrant and post-migrant societies, universities have to work as a safe space, as a protected space. The obligation to protect cannot lie in trigger warnings or political correctness, but means creating environments where the political powers and interests have no access, and where students can try out ideas, even erroneous ideas, and especially subversive ideas, without having to fear. We see in the case of the Central European University how endangered these environments are in these days, and that we should brace ourselves. Only in a protected space, collaborative explorations like the one between my Syrian and my Jewish and Israeli students on the German Holocaust memorial culture and questions of universalizing memory can happen. We will also have to become more flexible and experimental in our practices, and the exhibition reminds us of this, because the spaces left to us have manifold limitations, and we have to work at the interstices, like in this building now with this exhibition. The exhibition has to make use of the architecture as we find it, with all its limitations. So if I had time to go on now, I could tell you how rewarding this is, not only educationally, but also intellectually and academically. And there's at least half a dozen ideas for future research projects that I can take out of this class. But I guess that you will get these ideas yourselves now from the presentations of the students. Thank you. And maybe now, with the students' presentations, that you just say your name before you start. Yeah. Wafa.
Hi everyone, my name is Wafa Mustafa and I come from Syria. I am a first year student at Bard College Berlin. And yes, I would like to thank you all for being here today. And I have 3 minutes and I would like to thank so many people, but most important, I would like to thank my professor and most of the times my mother, Marion. And also, I would like to thank my Filou, I don't know, friends, whatever. There's so many things to say. I've been thinking about this for the past week, and it's really hard. And I feel that I'm having a heart attack now. So I would just go to the easier part. And I thought of talking about my short film. But that would be a little bit complicated. So I just decided to say some passage. It's about the film, and it's also in the film. And it will be in Arabic, so please feel free to wear your headphones to get some translation. And so I will just read the passage. And okay. أنا لم أكبر في غيابك أبي، لم أفهم الصبر ولم أتقن الانتظار. أنا تلك الطفلة المسكونة بالصور الكثيرة، الحية خلف النافذة البعيدة والمفجوعة بالسؤال: كيف يقتل الفجر بقذيفة دبابة؟ هو أكثر الوقت إيلاما أبي، على حافة الغياب الجديد يخذلني قلبي وقدماي. بحزن ذات السنوات الست أفكر: هل غيرت العتمة شكل عينيك والابتسامة؟ لا يتوقف هذا العالم عن الدوران في رأسي، يضيق بي صدري ويكبر علي القهر. بداخلي طفلة حزينة تخاف الوقت والنوافذ الواسعة، تحترف مثلي تأمل السقف المرتفع، وتبكي طويلا صوت أب لا تفهم غيابه. تستنزفني ذات السنوات الست يا الله، وعبثا أحاول جعلها تنام الليلة أيضا. Thank you all.
Hello, my name is Nina. I'm a third-year student at Bard College Berlin from the United States. And so I guess I'll talk a little bit about my creative process creating this work of art, but also the struggles that came with it, which for me the big challenge was in shifting my work from something very academic and based in words to something more artistic or personal or visual. I don't know if I quite got the visual part, but I tried. And so I've never had any artistic background, and I started this course in the first semester, which we dealt with a kind of more academic picture of migration history with a very specific research question about the relationship between Holocaust memorialization here in Germany and sort of what that then can implicitly say about how German culture defines itself, and then kind of brought this question to ask what sort of expectations are being placed about Holocaust memory or Holocaust remembrance on people who come to Germany as migrants. And as we came into the second semester, I think I really struggled with how to turn this like large research work into something that felt a lot more artistic. And I eventually came to it by something sort of not unrelated, but I was thinking about the relationship of Passover to migration history. And Passover is my favorite holiday. It's something that's really personal and meaningful to me. And I wanted to celebrate it with my class because it always had this sort of narrative that talks about the experience of migration and what diaspora feels like. And after I compiled a Haggadah, which is the book that you use to take through celebrating Passover. And after I celebrated with this class, I decided to use this as the project because it felt like it eventually came kind of full circle back to my first question about how to universalize memory. Because when we were celebrating this holiday together, I thought that the narrative given would be something that everyone would instantly relate to, because to me it felt so personal to what we've been talking about in the class. But the reality kind of was more that I was sharing this holiday and this sort of personal experience with them, and that it wasn't necessarily the most like relatable piece of history to share. And so in the end I came back to this discussion of how do we make memory universal, and is that even possible? So, thank you.
Hi, my name is Anna. I'm a second-year student from the United States as well. And I'm just going to briefly talk about the topic of our project, which I did with my classmate, Maheen, who's hiding somewhere there. So we basically dealt with the very broad but definitely underrepresented or undervalued topic of migrant women and their particular experiences within that axis of identity. So we were basically interested mainly in relating this project to space, how women experience public and private space in Germany, and the limitations as well as the values of these different spaces that women occupy or are forced to occupy. And our research was mainly focused on women coming from the Global South. So we basically wanted to, throughout our project and throughout our artistic creations, place more value on the daily and sort of considered mundane acts of these women and how they go through their lives in very small, mundane ways that are not considered important in many academic research frameworks. So we wanted to understand how certain acts contribute to women's experience of belonging, or how certain acts which are forced upon these women experience to their disbelonging within the city and within their own homes, and to aestheticize these acts through our drawings, which maybe you saw, you should check out, in order to place more value on them. And an important thing I think that we had to understand throughout this class was the importance of personal perspectives and how everything that we create is coming from our own perspective, and we're not speaking for anyone, and we're not trying to give voice to anyone, because even though we did academic research as well as non-academic research and spoke to migrant women about their experiences, it's still our perspective on the situation and our representations thereof. And basically, we felt this was important because, first of all, obviously there's a huge lack of academic and institutional interest in the specific experiences of women within a migrational context. Even within activism, there's not a lot of space for their voices and understanding their specific needs and experiences. And it's very important to acknowledge the different levels of violence, both psychological and physical, that these women are experiencing upon arriving here, especially refugee women who have to live in camps. And basically within a larger educational context, I think it was important to, throughout this project and also this class, to remain critical of academic frameworks that put more attention on academic language and constructions over personal experiences, over seemingly uninteresting experiences, over daily realities, and finally to put more value on the personal, on the, like so much of academic work is from this bird's eye perspective and from this outside kind of often quantitative perspective, and to just place value on the daily, on the personal, on the honest perspectives of people rather than only our observations and our need to, intellectualize all of these concepts. And that's basically it.
Hello, my name is Reisa. I came from Syria, and I would like to thank Bart Kalish and our professor Marion for this nice experience which I had, because it's a new experience for me to know more about the German history after the Second War and about the German musicians who they immigrated from Germany after the Second War. My project was about musical migration. It's a project I started with 3 of my friends in 2015 about music which we listened when we were coming from Syria to Germany. It wasn't only a difficult journey, we learned more from this journey. So we made a project about the music which we learned from Syria to Germany, Turkey, Greece, and Macedonia, Bulgaria, and then Germany, and what we noticed and what we learned from this music, and how we noticed that there is a lot of mutual instruments, and we knew that there is no clean race of music because all the music mixed and immigrated like people. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry that I will not talk about the work I did here, but I will just, I'm interested to account, I will go back to the language, and which Marion also just pointed to it, and I'm really, in a way, interested to know that, so since those 3 days, how many time refugee is mentioned and how many time a human being would be mentioned. And then, yeah, so, and just to I think we are like not anymore in the 60s that Heinrich Lubka would say, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, liebe Neger, or liebe Flüchtlinge. So I think we are a little bit, we are passing this point, or we already passed this history. We are in a different era. So I think from the point of view what Marion said, it's already, there is a reaction, and I think the academical institutions or educational institutions should react on the language and should react on this word, and to bring it to a discussion, because I mean there is different things. There is labels and there is misusing of language. Like for an example, there is a misuse of the integration word, which is not, in a way, not at all pointing into a bad thing, because integration is that everybody is participating to create a peaceful society, and which it now at the time it gives an impression to assimilation or to be integrated, that someone has to be German. And this is so another point. This is a misuse of language. But refugee is not, or Flüchtlinge, Geflüchtete, so in any kind of language, it's not a misuse of language. It's othering. It's a labeling. And I think personally, to build up a common society, it would not be possible to build it up by labeling another part, to have another part. And yeah, for me, it was really interesting to experience this class like last year, which is in a search of migration, or migration in Germany after World War II. And I think I wanted to say there should not be just our class. I think it was not just in search of history. It was making a different point in history, because we were, as Marion said, and Marion already reacted on the word refugee, and that is she's presenting an academical institution. That means there should be, or there can be already a reaction on it. And it's also for me, like, it's interesting to see how an 100% academical system or an academical class could be changed, or could be like these negotiations could be happen in it, that just by adding art in it. And it's interesting to see or to experience this this work, because I mean, how I experienced it, or how I see it, I saw this class just turning up to be a platform, a little bit just as a platform of exchanging. And I mean, it might also be, I mean, it could be like a social sculpture in an academic college. And this is, I think it's not which this might bring some other question. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Victoria. I come from Mexico City. And again, hearing during this whole semester and also in this conference, hearing us all talk about the same topic with different accents, and even having to struggle to find that common terminology to understand each other. And I do believe that the gap between the perceptions are the main problem with understanding another culture. For me specifically, when I came to Germany, and then I had to learn how to conceptualize everything in this radical structure that finds its roots in the language. And that made me realize how it is all rooted in the way of expression. And that made me want to find a mode of expression that was plural and inclusive. And so I turned to the space and time, which is something that we all share regardless of our ethnicity and age and gender and etc. And in the city of Berlin, we all share public transport. So I turned to recording the public transport that connects one of the most immigrant neighborhoods I know, which is Neukölln, specifically Sonnenallee, and one of the most German neighborhoods I know, which is Niederschönhausen. And what I wanted to bring out with this as well was how does the sensation and the feeling and the history of the city itself can be experienced through the places. So I did through sound. I did the field recordings of this journey from Sonnenallee to Niederschönhausen, and then did some music to it for every station. So in this way, what I wanted to do was just finding a way in which to actually reach the human, regardless of the citizen or the refugee or the woman or the man, because at the end of the day, we are all made out of the same. So.
Hello, my name is Tamar. I was born in Georgia and I migrated to Israel in 2000. And as part of the migration course last semester, I was writing about the experiences of Jewish migrants from ex-Soviet Union countries in Germany and in Israel, and looking at forms of looking at forms of Jewishness in the most abstract and broadest sense. And as part of my visualization for that course, I was thinking of making a meme. So for those of you who don't know, memes are any picture that has a text on it and is meant to transfer some sort of idea usually, or maybe always, in an ironic or humorous manner. And that was my project for the entire of most of the semester. I was looking of ways of taking these experiences, which are not necessarily anything traumatic that I'm referring to, but really the most simplest, everyday experiences that shape the identity of these migrants in Germany and also in Israel, which are very similar, actually, the experiences, not Germany and Israel. And as part of my research for that project, I was looking at all sorts of memes in general. And one day I was researching migration in Europe memes, something like that, or refugees in Europe memes. And I was surprised to find mostly very upsetting and depressing memes, mostly about Syrian refugees. So just to give you an example, some of them are projected outside. Most of them refer to rather refugees having iPhones and therefore not being, I don't know, worthy of having some sort of rights. They said something like, look at these poor migrants with an iPhone, unreal. Or the other kind was showing a picture of a lot of Middle Eastern men and writing something like, where are all the women and children? Why did you leave your women behind? And while my memes were very kind of specific and niche in the beginning, I really had the urge to kind of respond to that. And yeah, so I started kind of taking these violent or upsetting memes that I found and thinking of how I could respond to it in a humorous manner. And very often it was very difficult because you need to work with stereotypes, and that means that if you're working with stereotypes in memes, you're also perpetuating them in a sense, and you need to constantly think of how am I going to include this and clarify that we're looking at it from a critical perspective. And also it was very difficult because memes are very, even though they're a social form of communication, and a successful meme is a popular one, they are still a very subjective medium. So it was very hard for me to make a meme from the perspective of the Syrian migrant, because I'm not. So at some point I had to have Wafa next to me, sitting just to think like, Wafa, what do you think of this? Yes, that's what I think too. So we would write it together just so I don't feel like I'm appropriating someone's experience. And yeah, so my memes somehow ended up being a collection of memes that refer to the Syrian migration and memes that refer to like the ex-Soviet Jewish migration in Germany and Israel, which is quite random. But I think that about memes in general, that they really echo with what we do in this class, which is take experiences which are not really scarce. A lot of people identify with them, but they're somehow not studied or marginalized, even though they're not, for example, migration. We don't look at it as this temporary state, but as a norm that has, it's always been a norm. Migration has always happened. We are all migrants. And just expressing it in a visual way, and yeah, giving voice to these experiences. Thank you.
I'm gonna stand up. Okay. Hi, my name is Klaar, and today I'm here with Integration Guru. We run a helpful lifestyle blog, and also in fall we'll be starting with our own integration course, the premium package. Today we have a little treat for you. We'll be doing an interactive quiz that we also have on our blog, and I want you to respond to me. So I'll start with a statement, and if you answer positively, please raise your hand. So asparagus, yay or nay? It's Sunday night. Have you done your groceries? It's Saturday night, sorry. It's Saturday night. Have you done your groceries for Sunday? Raise your hand. Oh. Can you please explain to me why, if you want to say no, you say erstmal nichts? No one. All right. Well, if you answered mostly yes, congratulations, you're integrated. Mostly no, we have a long way to go. Maybe read our blog. Thank you.
So I'm Bono. Well, we did the project together. And I guess the idea of this sort of, black and white, this black and white like metaphor, let's say, is in a way to show how like because Clara has been doing the sort of like emotional research on integration, I've been doing the more legal perspective on this, and we sort of tried to show how there's like in a way this kind of successful integration, which is sort of like, which doesn't really fit to the actual conceptual idea, and like nowadays there's just, if you legally like fulfill some requirements, you're supposedly like a case of success, which naturally is like not really what it's supposed to be. Can you continue? I'm a bit nervous.
Okay, yeah, so what we thought was very important is that this idea of integration is portrayed really black and white, especially in the legal system, but also in our conception. There is an idea that you can be an integrated migrant, and this is very portrayed in the media. So we also gathered a bunch of flyers and posters and of these like perfect images of like the refugee with like the very typical German person and their best friends, and it all worked out. And this idea, we wanted to point it out and to play with it and to dramatize it. And we wanted to make it confrontational. So the blog, if you've read any of the articles, is really ironic, to exaggerate it a little. And then what we did to also bring the fact that we don't think integration is a joke. We think it can be possible, and like, it's very important to give mediums for people to be able to adapt to different societies. And that the experiences are incredibly varied. So what we've done is the blog posts are very satirical and they are very exaggerated, but the comments underneath are research we've done on different opinions and different experiences, and so the reactions to these topics pointed out.
And I guess the idea is that we sort of try to go, this confrontational aspect is like in a way a realization to like sort of get back to this idea in the end that there is a conceptual sort of validity of this idea of integration, and we sort of through confrontation try to like start this reevaluation process in a way, and I hope that will work.
Hi, my name is Ella, and I'm representing all the Viennese, or students from Vienna, because I'm the only Viennese in our class. So we had all these projects to put them into an exhibition. And maybe you could show the time-lapse video where we build up, yes, of the last very intensive days of building our exhibition. But our collaboration already started in the end of March, when all the BART students came to Vienna, and we had a very intense day of discussion. So we are at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, but particularly in the Institute of Art and Architecture. And we are a multicultural studio, and I want to introduce my classmates. That's Clarissa from Hong Kong, an exchange student, and Clara as well from Hong Kong, also an exchange student. Aya from Israel, also an exchange student. Victor should also be somewhere here from Paris. Then Adam, who is not an exchange student but from Slovakia, also studying in Vienna. And Duha from Germany, also studying in Vienna. And of course our teacher, born in Ireland, living in Berlin and teaching in Vienna. So I'm the exception at the academy for being Viennese and Austrian. But we are now at our studio is from the platform CMT, which is Construction Material Technology, and we always build one-to-one prototypes, and it's the aim to actually build something. Our studio is this semester is about the topic of architecture and of migration, or migrating architecture, and particularly exhibition architecture. This exhibition here is the second of 3 smaller projects that we have. And the overall topic, or the title, is Tread Softly, which is also the title of this exhibition. We have a lot of content in the studio, but I just want to point out some of that. For example, one ingredient was Richard Sennett, who sees the architects as one of the only professions that have to deal with present-day topics and alternative ideas of society and make them manifest and also show them to other people. And that's what we are trying to do in this exhibition too, because we want to present your artistic work into a cohesive installation or exhibition. And we also always look very closely on what we already have, not only the build structure here, but also the work that you did, and not start from scratch, but but reinterpret what we have and make something completely new out of it. We also got a very generous pile of cardboard from Auerswälder Wellpappe to build the whole exhibition, which was helpful because otherwise we were probably completely lost for building an exhibition within 4 days. And it's the main reason why we have this is because it's fire resistant and therefore can be used in exhibitions. But also all the other materials and devices that you see in the exhibition are all rather either lent or they were given to us or were recycled, which was also a big part that we make something in not too much to support the consumer society that we live in. And another ingredient was a text by Gottfried Semper about the 4 elements of architecture, where he said that walls are the primary element of architecture, but a wall is not always the same wall. So we tried to make them easily, so that you can dismantle them easily, build them up again, and you could even climb them, and which is now very, but but also architecture always has to withstand pressure and in its most physical sense, which was also part of the whole exhibition. But now the intensive collaboration that you see here started last weekend with many more discussions and tests that we had together about how we could actually build this. And it was 4 days of planning and experimenting and building and making mistakes, reorganizing them, trying again, try to make them actually standing and develop everything, make compromises and what you can all think of. So we came up with the idea of 4 islands instead of spreading the whole exhibition through the whole building. So in this way we want to open up the exhibition, and you should migrate through it, wander through it, and have these more intense stations. In the same time, it's also in reaction to the built environment that we have here, because we couldn't touch the walls, so everything had to be installed in another way, and it's all temporary and will be dismantled already this evening. So we start with the first island, which is downstairs, with the table for Nina's Haggadah, because we thought about the first thing is the welcome and the coming together on a table. And then we spread your network of integration guru through the whole building. Then the second island is up there at the window, where it's about listening to the stories and to their journeys and their movement, and also how to come to a country, and with this metaphor of the plant. And then also the stations of integration with Dachil's very beautiful paintings about the integration papers. Then the third one was the daily life in the new climate that we have here, with unfortunately Muhannad is not here, but with Café Kotti and the stereotypes used in the memes. And then you dive into the culture with the Holocaust memorialization, with the women's images, and then we, in the end, have this immersive installation from Wafa's work, where it is a space within a space, a room within a room, and all those ideas came together there. But what was also very important for us is the handwritten titles on the cardboard, which can be erased, which leave a palimpsest or an imprint on it, and also an impression to all of us. And it's not only in the material, but also, I would say, it left a very big impression to all those who were contributing and working for this exhibition. So hopefully, if you go outside now, you have new perspectives on the work and can dig into them more deeply. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Marga. I'm a second-year student. I originally wasn't going to say anything because I was scared of coming off as some sort of plug for BCB, because I wrote my very academic essay last semester on the merits of liberal arts education, specifically in the context of integration of so-called refugees into German society. And I wanted to say that the more deeply I've delved into this education and examined its background, just the more I have become a huge fan of it. And that's also why I chose to represent my essay in the form of a pot plant who's very dear to me. His name is Frederick. He's been with me for the duration of my liberal arts education. And he's a metaphor for this type of education. It's something that I think is very resilient. He's more than a year and a half old now, but he looks very fresh. It's something also, though, that requires constant care and attention and negotiation with the external environment, and something that's constantly being redefined. And I think it's our responsibility to care for this type of education. Thank you.
Thank you so much for these reflections, which constantly inspire us as your instructors and, co-learners in this process. Let me turn it over now to Jane and then to Mena, who will give us some thoughts, first about this project, but also, as we said at the beginning, about education and the question of migration and creativity more generally.
Thanks, Kerry. I feel sort of superannuated here. I think this is the new generation. You've gotten everything you need. My name is Jane Newman, and I'm currently a fellow at the American Academy in Berlin. It's one of the sponsors of this meeting. I'm here, I think, because of two of my forms of activism that I participate in myself. I'm at the University of California at Irvine. Normally, that's my day job. I do a lot of work with the organization Scholars at Risk, which is we had some participation, I think, last night from a Philipp Schwarz Initiative, a fellow in Osnabrück. This helps scholars from endangered situations find safe havens, if you will, when they need to get out of town. I also want to, I haven't done so much work myself, but I am affiliated with people who work in the United States with something I wanted to mention that maybe people don't know about, the so-called Indivisible Guide. Is this something that you guys know about, the Indivisible Guide? This is, you can just Google it, Indivisible Guide. It's the way that sort of citizen activism is becoming kind of political, that is on a local level. And I just want to say that one of the things that the American Academy should be representing is a better face of America than sometimes we hear about. And I think that if you go and you look into the Indivisible Guide, you'll find some good work. So I think that's kind of why I'm here, actually, talking to you. I'm actually, while at the American Academy, working on a book on a man named Erich Auerbach, as Kerry said, who is the same generation of German Jewish refugees as Hannah Arendt was. He was a literary scholar who was doubly forced into exile, first from Hitler's Germany to Istanbul, Turkey, where he taught for 11 years during the war, and then in his second exile, he came to the United States, and I'm writing a book about Auerbach. I was reminded of Auerbach yesterday during Professor Haidar's remarks when he spoke of the incredible riches that the Syrian refugees, and I also take distance from that word, many of them highly trained, of course, have brought to Lebanon. And so I was reminded of Auerbach and his great impact, and that great impact of that generation of German Jewish intellectuals and scholars upon the United States. Of course, the United States is a country made up of refugees and immigrants, as we know, some of them somewhat voluntary, like Auerbach, many not, including the forced migrants of the slave labor, on many of whose backs the country was built. So in both the modern era and the past, immigrants have been the backbone of many of our countries and civilizations, and so I think that they must all be welcome in all of our countries, including my own now more than ever. When I'm not at the American Academy, as I said, writing on Auerbach, I do my job as a professor of Renaissance and early modern literature at UC Irvine. I'm thus neither a political theorist, nor a historian, nor an anthropologist or policymaker of any sort. But my work on these earlier periods, the European 16th and 17th century, has made me very interested in the legacies of these earlier periods and their afterlives in the modern and postmodern era. These legacies are very much with us today, and at our conference, I think, this was the period of the 16th and the 17th century in Europe, the consolidation of the nation state, and the creation of the usually only notionally homogeneous national polity, communities, and the enforcement of that homogeneity by the apparatus of the state. And so I think that this is a very important kind of moment of the European history to think about and how it lives on. These are probably not things you study or think about in your daily lives as I do, but the so-called Peace of Augsburg in 1555 and the Treaty of Westphalia of 1648 created the discursive conditions and material infrastructures of population control and the balance of power among only a select number of great state powers that get to decide what everybody else has to do. And that's the sort of Westphalian system. Today's international relations theorists say that we are right now in a post-Westphalian moment, beyond the moment of the nation state, when sub-state and trans-state actors have become increasingly important. And I think that that's really a kind of a central part of what we're dealing with in terms of our discussion of migration regimes. And so I think having a kind of an understanding of what led to the need for the Peace of Westphalia, the Treaty of Westphalia, and interrogating whether we're really in a post-Westphalian moment now has become very, very important for me. All of this by way of saying that I agree with Professor Gatto that history matters. And so I'd like to advocate looking into dialogues or conversations between the past and the present as we either rush headlong into our futures or maybe creep very carefully forward, which I would advocate. So my professional interest in afterlives and dialogues between the past and the present, in my case, means that I look for dialogues and conversations everywhere. And I found them in quite a number of variations in the very excellent student projects in the Tread Softly exhibit that was been discussed and displayed. And I want to sort of talk a little bit about those because I find what you've all done so incredibly important for me understanding things that I'm going to kind of like steal your stuff and put it in my framework here, okay? Dialogues create the possibility or perhaps even demand what has been called elliptical thinking. Ellipses are those kind of expanded circles, right, that have two points. There's no center it's not a circle. An ellipsis is a sort of expanded thing with two centers, if you will. Ellipses are always weighted or anchored and balanced by 2 points. And I think elliptical thinking is very important because it prevents universalizing. It prevents us from saying that one position is the position that is the one we have to focus on. The 2 points of dialogue of an ellipsis are constantly in conversation with one another. And it's this kind of geometry, I think, that Marion's class is probably engaged in, this elliptical thinking of the post-war German immigration and migration today. And indeed, even the Bard-Vienna conversation is a kind of elliptical thinking installation, but then also these things that you guys have done. The Tread Softly projects perform this kind of elliptical thinking, I think, in very expert fashion. They think and they inquire, they demand that we think elliptically too. I can't discuss them all, but I'll try to comment on most of them. Let me start with Mustafa's film Travels, which puts her father and the young German Jewish girl whose name she discovered at the Denkmal in Mitte in conversation with one another, that Mafka Farbe. And you bring these two moments together, and I think that they kind of, if I understood it correctly, kind of challenged you to kind of get out of your comfort zone a little bit. Right? And that's what elliptical thinking and this kind of dialogicity does for us, I think, is moves us off our points. And so I really appreciated what you were doing there. Muhammad Kakoni's film, A Place to Smoke, the Café Coty, just right out here in the hallway, likewise puts Muhammad himself and his experiences in dialogue with another generation of immigrants to Germany in his conversation with the Turkish cafe owner Ehsan Yazaroglu. And I loved that, the generational dialogue that was created between the two of them, and then the Syrian-Turkish dialogue, that kind of, we shouldn't get sort of fixed on any one of these, but always be comparing them, if you will. These literal conversations that we had prevent each personal position from becoming static, I think, and also ask us to think different historical periods and contexts together. Victoria Martinez's excellent sound installation of Sonnenallee Niederschönhausen likewise forces us to think elliptically about the cityscape of Berlin, dialogically between the two neighborhoods that seem so far apart, the 14 kilometers apart, as she says, but that must be thought together via the U-Bahn as we think about the migration landscape of the city. Joel Dombrauer's intergenerational dialogue, implicitly with his grandparents, I think, and his reflections on memorial culture in Berlin, along with Nina's project as it originally started that way, I think, it reminds us that memory is itself a technology of comparison as we confront the past in the middle of our present. It's a de facto case of ellipticism, if you will, memory culture. Finally, both Tamar Mar's migration memes, which I love, which literalizes the notion of traveling or shifting positions in the fact that the memes kind of gloss one another, her very focus on the genre of the meme I found really wonderful. The meme is inherently dialogical, right? I mean, it travels around, right? And it's always forcing us to think in comparison. I find the intriguing signage of the exhibit, which the scan codes that you'll see placed strategically, kind of makes us ourselves enter into dialogue with the exhibit itself, right? So we scan them and they link, right, to various things. So we are sort of forced into that position of conversation, along with Mar's injunction that viewers leave comments on her migration meme display. Also, Dacia Sados's portraits, as we look into each of these portraits, the viewer actually creates a kind of a diptych, if you will. We are portraits ourselves of our personal position looking at these portraits, right? And we create these two positions. So I think that all of the installations and a lot of the technology involved has brought us into this kind of lovely conversation with many of your works. And if this is what the liberal arts can do, as Marga says in her paper, and as the Plant Friedrich tells us, when Bard College Berlin students think about migration regimes in these multiple ways, I say bring it on. I'm a huge fan too, Marga. If this is what we can do in our educational institutions, I say let's just keep on doing it. You're doing a great job. These student projects asked us to engage and to comment on all of these issues and on the necessity of elliptical thinking and dialogical analysis. And they prevent us from thinking about one-size-fits-all solutions to various of the challenges we perceive. I think that's a move forward towards a solution. We've been asked several times in the discussions, what's the solution, right? And I think the solution is you guys. So thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Jane, and thank you very much to the conference organizers, the ZZF Potsdam and Bard College Berlin, for inviting me here. My comments will be shorter and slightly more extemporaneous, if you allow me. My name is Mena Marc Hanna. I'm a professor of musicology and music composition and the dean of the Barenboim Said Academy here in Berlin. First of all, I have to say that I'm completely overwhelmed by much of the work that has been produced in this conference and this exhibition, and by the vibrancy and exchange of ideas that is exhibited in this project. The Barenboim Said Academy is a new music academy in Berlin that focuses its admissions on the Middle East and North Africa, but is not exclusive to the Middle East and North Africa. And we offer degree programs in all instrumental varieties of the orchestra, piano, composition, and conducting, as well as a certificate program in artist diploma, which is a sort of postgraduate program, and are looking forward to beginning the first accredited bachelor degree program in Arabic music, which could exist in Germany, but that's a sort of sneak preview of things that are yet to come. But because of the constitution of this academy and the makeup of the students in this academy, we often have discussions about what is happening vis-a-vis Europe and the rest of the world, particularly the Middle East and North Africa. And many of these discussions take place in our classes, especially in a music history class that I teach, but also in philosophy and general history class. The first time this came up was when we were discussing music of the 15th century. And you have this kind of first major European identity crisis with the refugee crisis of 1453 after the fall of Constantinople. And you have these others sort of flood into Europe and their portrayal through art, their portrayal through music, and how they are represented in art and music. And immediately the students in this class perked up and made connections between what was happening at that time, what's happening now, and realizing that what is happening now is not a sort of one-time event. I mean, we oftentimes, especially reading it in the press, we have a sort of historically narcissistic perspective of these things, that they just happen now and they are just happening now, when they are actually things that have historical antecedents. Then another time that we often talk about these, this specific theme, that of migration and movement through music, is in the 20th century, which I think it was the critic George Steiner had once described as the 20th century, artists of the 20th century being primarily extraterritorial. So they never are in their place. And there's two pieces particularly which really exhibit that. One is almost the entire work of Arnold Schoenberg, the German Jewish composer who then spent the rest of his life in California with almost everybody else. It was a sort of Weimar on the West Coast. And also Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, which I just listened to a piece of his with a good friend of mine this past weekend called Gesang der Jünglinge, which is a piece that is a purely electronic piece, and it's a recording of a boy soprano singing a line of text composed by Stockhausen from the book of Daniel, specifically about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, three Jewish faithful youths that were thrown into the furnace by King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, this is a kind of take at least even from Stockhausen's perspective, who is a very controversial figure, but we don't have to get into that. It's a take of German guilt and massive social and psychological trauma that he is then trying to express through music. Because this boy's voice is completely perversified electronically, and you have the human voice kind of plunged into this cold realm of generated sine tone waves. And you have this immediately discourse, this dissonance between the human voice and the electronic realm in which it is plunged into. This is, I think, a dissonance that comes with movement, with exile, and with migration. In our classes, we often discuss the origins of exile, and certainly Edward Said's perspective on exile, since he is one of the founders of our academy. And exile has its origins in this ancient practice of banishment, which was obviously a very well-practiced thing in the ancient world. I myself am someone who studies 20th century music and 21st century music, but I also do work in early Coptic chant and early sort of the beginnings of notation and how that travels, that music travels from the Middle East and from other places through into Europe. It's reflective of what your project is, Refka. I noticed that for me, it's very difficult to kind of work with this body of work because I am, to a degree, in exile. I'm with this group of people who are migrants or exiles or people of the diaspora who live in these small cracks between worlds. And I have to say that it can be spiritually and emotionally an annihilating and tough life. But I think that we have an opportunity that can really be exemplified by the artists and students in front of you right here. And it's exemplified by this very project. The art and the students in front of you show a very rich experience. And it's a rich experience precisely because one has the memory of one's heritage and past. And that is sort of working together or sometimes against the reality of one's current life. This is what Edward Said calls a counterpoint, which is very nice because it's a musical term, so I can talk about it. And in this sense, we have the counterpoint of one's past. We have this sort of line, this beautiful melodic line of our nostalgia, our past and our heritage, sort of working together as an individual thread with one's current. And it's these two threads together that create a beautiful piece of polyphony, a beautiful piece of music, a beautiful tapestry. This, I think, is really exemplified in Victoria Martinez's work. It's a nice example of the progression between one's past and one's current life seen through the focal point of migration by taking the German public transportation. And I think it's also exemplified in Wafel Mustafa's work, which reminds me a little bit about the poetry of Mahmoud Darwish, Take Me as a Relic to Your Home. There's a sort of relation between this sense of forced exile and being out of place, an in-between place, that I think is a very beautiful poetic connection. So all that to say, thank you for the opportunity and thank you for really universalizing this theme of migration, as I think someone said here, through art. And we can now show that the narrative is not one of tragedy and difficultness, even though that's part of it, but it's actually one of creation and rebirth. Thank you.
So I'd like to thank everyone for their contributions to this panel. I think that the notions of elliptical thinking, of dissonance and of counterpoint that just got brought into the discussion as a way to think about these art projects, and again, the role of education and creativity as a whole when confronting a society that is, as it has been for some time, a society of migration, but perhaps is only starting to understand that in certain ways now, can be very valuable. So we started 15 minutes late. I'm hoping we don't mind taking 10 minutes out of the... Okay, so that would leave us 10 minutes for questions now in order to end still with time for lunch. I'd love to open the floor. Perhaps best if we gather a few questions and then give people one chance to respond, and then we'll let you go to your lunch break.
Thanks for, I thought this... It's working. Really interesting project that you presented. I had a question or response to what the young man with the crown was saying. I can't see your face from here, unfortunately, about using the term refugee. And I felt very sympathetic to what you were saying. I myself, when I speak very consciously, I try to refer to my friends from Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, wherever. But there were two of the people I know from Afghanistan and Syria made actually, I thought, quite an interesting and point for using the term refugee, and I was just wondering what you think about these arguments. So the first by a young man from Afghanistan whose application for asylum was rejected, and at that very moment he stressed very strongly that he is a refugee because it comes with having, or rather not having, certain rights. So in a way it's a situation that's imposed upon him, and sort of ignoring that and not speaking about himself as a refugee would ignore that situation. And the second point, which friends from Syria have made, is that they didn't come voluntarily. They were forced to come. They had to flee. And again, they would argue that thinking about themselves and identifying not as refugees would, in a way, deprive them of that also political identity. So that's why I thought these were actually quite two arguments in favor of using the term refugee as a sort of self-description, actually, that are worthwhile thinking about. And I guess I was just wondering what you thought about these points.
My question is to Wafa and the project on your visit to the Holocaust Memorial and the afterthoughts and how you connect your experience with the experience of Mafka Haber and all of that. I think this is something pretty challenging, I would imagine, because the background for this, I mean, you are Palestinian yourself as well, and throughout the Palestinian diaspora and suffering, there's a kind of no way of connecting this with the suffering of the Jewish communities historically and especially during the Second World War, because these were so clashing victimhoods in some way, and there is a rejection of the victimhood of the others because the victims were clashing. And I want to hear from you more about the kind of resistance you might have to connecting your victimhood of some sort, or victimhood of the people now in Syria, with the victimizing of the Jews during the Second World War. And is it because you're in Berlin? Is it because that the regime that persecuted you and your family already carries the anti-Israeli slogan, and that's in a way sticking to you from that rhetoric? Is it just simply the coincidence of being in this kind of course and being directed in some way towards that, and you saw something there? I mean, this is something novel about Arab suffering opening up to Jewish suffering. And because, frankly, most of the time, being a victim does not make you, unfortunately, a better person. Victims tend to, close on their experience, claim victimhood. They want to be the worst victim, the victim number one in the world. And unfortunately, even at the individual level, victims of child abuse tend themselves to have abusive tendencies later in life. Not all of them, of course, but there is a general tendency. And one of the abuse is to deny the victimhood of others. So I would like to see your own experience about how you opened up to this type of connection with other victims, especially those clashing victims. Yeah. Thank you.
Do you have another question?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question for the students who did the integration blog, and this also, I think, relates to the MAME project. How do you connect in the integration blog, you said that you have the posts are satirical and then the comments are serious. So that seemed to be a nice kind of sense of commentary, because we know that satire is so effective, especially in the US. Like a lot of liberal critique, all of left, like late night TV is very satirical and getting everyone outraged and to repost things. But then there's also a failure kind of to move between that satirical outrage and change. So we see this kind of tidal wave of right-wing movements in the US and others. So what are your thoughts about the kind of move from satire that grasps you and a kind of commentary that would have a political push?
To this.
Okay, I just want to say it really short. The thing is that this is a social, the question is about society, and in the society there is a queue or a line, and I think the first one in the line or in the queue might be a king or a queen, and a refugee would be in the end of the line. And the thing is, the friends from Afghanistan, they might have what is really so-called white paper, which means a deportation paper. And if someone has a deportation or white paper, that means he or she is not even in the line. So they have to crawl to just catch anything. The thing is, the ones who are in the line, they try to find an existence, but the ones who are not in the line, they have not even a chance to talk about existence, and that's why they just catch the last part of the line. Yeah.
Can I quickly just follow up? I think that it's really, really important, and we have to be very careful with the term refugee and what it means in terms of the legality of a specific status versus the usage of that term in common parlance. That term does have, I'm sorry to say, negative connotations and connotations of othering. Just like several terms that are used in common parlance, sometimes by politicians, like Kriegsregion or Konfliktregion, and another term like an exile or migration status. There has to be a better way where we can use language more carefully to talk about what is actually a vehicle for oppressing continuing minorities. So I completely follow up what this young man has said in terms of that refugee is a very, very explosive and incendiary term, and that it should be used very carefully. And I certainly don't like to use it at all in common parlance. So that's all.
I would like to mention that I'm not Palestinian, I'm Syrian. But I had this, I know it's complicated, and it's part of the process, I guess, because I have this strong connection to Palestine. And actually I had this through my father, who gave me the name of a Palestinian news agency called Wafa. And actually, I was raised on this, not only because I was Syrian, because this is also part of the Syrian culture. We learned this in school. This is part of the everyday conversation with your friends, with your parents, everywhere. It's not something you just read about. And so I was strongly connected to this, and I didn't have the luxury of belonging to the Palestinian cause. To me, it was where I belonged to. And at some point before the revolution started in Syria, I didn't belong to Syria. I just decided to belong to Palestine. And then, hopefully and luckily, I found this I found this connection to my country through the revolution. But this is actually, and at the last semester, I was not working on this. I was working on integration, and especially Syrians. But then Joel and Nina asked me to join their project and to have this conversation between Arabs and Jews, and to see how can we connect together, and then to connect to the Holocaust. But I was a little bit confused, because actually I've been to Berlin for like few months, but I haven't visited any memorials. I tried to, but I couldn't. And I didn't really know why, but I didn't really question myself. I was like, okay, I cannot do this, and I won't do it. But then when they asked me, I felt like maybe this is the time. And at the beginning, I just visited the memorial by myself. And it was good that I went by myself, because I spent like 7 hours there. And it was actually, I didn't want to connect out, or I didn't want to confront myself with anything, but it happened. I didn't have the aim of like connecting my memories to these victims, and I don't see myself as a victim. And I actually work so hard every day to not see myself as a victim, because it's easy and it's satisfying, and it's everywhere. Everyone wants to. It's easy to everyone to treat you as a victim, but it's hard for me, and this is why sometimes while I was doing this, I was reading some novel, a Palestinian novel called Destiny's Concerto of the Holocaust and Nakba. And at some point, someone says that I wanted to see how victims see victims. And I was thinking about this, but I decided that I'm not a victim. And I'm labeled to be a victim, but I'm not. I know it doesn't necessarily mean that what we know now about victims, but I know that it will just bring me down, and I don't want this. And this is why I did this, and it was really hard, because for the past few years I was struggling to avoid thinking about this, not only losing my father, but losing all this. Just in one night, you just lose your home, your country, your everything you believed in. And it's hard, of course, but it was harder because I had to deal with it. And that was, I guess, thanks to Marion and thanks to my friends in this class, because I don't think that I would be able to do this without them. And actually, it's really hard now, and I don't really like listening to myself. It's weird, but I'm just glad. It's not only that I am proud of what I did. I'm also I'm just relieved that I had so many things in mind, and I couldn't even organize them because I was just so stressed. And for the first time, I could do this. And actually, I know I've been asked about the Palestine and everything, but I've always had this clear vision about this. I know what I believe in, and I know how do I think, and I still do the same. But the only thing that I didn't know much about the Holocaust earlier. And this is why I wanted to do this now. And thanks to them, I could do it now. Thank you.
I mean, very quickly, because I think everyone wants to go to lunch. Is this on? Okay. I would say yes, satire has proven to be very effective for the people that already agree with the ideas, and very ineffective in actually breaching the differences. And I think that's something that we did attempt to at least use it as a medium to open up discussion. But still, I would say that the audience of this conference, and it's in English, and the blog also plays with the idea that it's in English and talking about German integration, which is of course an issue. But it's of course written from our critique, our perspective, and that's the only one I would feel comfortable with satirizing.
I also think there's this element in a way of like deconstruction, because through seeing the one thing, you sort of relate what the opposite is, in irony at least. And I think that sort of like deconstruction of the concept through showing something that it should not be, I think that's sort of the attempt we had to actually start the discussion and thought process in that way, sort of, yeah.
Well, thanks to everyone. I know there's a lot more to discuss. Hopefully you can do that during the break. Let me please thank all of our panelists again for their amazing contributions.